Okay, thanks for joining us this evening, folks. To date, I have identified over 70 war memorial windows that commemorate service and sacrifice by members of different congregations. Over 40 of these windows commemorate the First World War, and that's what we'll be focusing on today, primarily because I found it was just too difficult to choose and mix in both wars. I do intend to do another one of these sessions which will look at Second World War memorial windows. These war memorial windows can be found in 8 of the 9 counties of Ulster. The only one county where I have not found a war memorial window so far is County Cavan. I'm going to be looking at one window from each county and also one window from Greater Belfast. And obviously, I'll also be giving a biography of at least one person from the relevant congregation. You'll see this window coming up again later on. So we're going to start in County Down. This window is in St. Patrick Church of Ireland in Banbridge. The window was designed by Heaton, Butler and Bain of London and was dedicated on Sunday the 26th of March 1922 by the Reverend Charles Frederick Darcy, who was the Archbishop of Armagh, the Church of Ireland Archbishop of Armagh and the Primate of all Ireland. As you can see, it's quite a complicated, or it's a window that has a lot of elements to it. So I'm going to break the window down, not literally, just so we can look at the different elements. So starting with the upper lights, they feature several items. On this side here, we have a laurel wreath, and around the laurel wreath are the words, "Be thou faithful unto death." Up at the top, we have the crown of life with the words, "I will give thee the crown of life." Over on this side, we have a shield bearing the red hand of Ulster, and the words around it are, "They rest from their labours." Down at the bottom, we have a wooden grave cross, and this is styled on the crosses which would have been erected at graves for First World War fatalities until they introduced the limestone war memorial headstones in the 1920s. In the centre is a panel which just has the words "Gone West." Whenever I was curious, why Gone West? But when I did a Google search, it turns out that the phrase "Gone West" was quite often used to mean somebody who has died or somebody or something which has been lost. So that gives that a bit of context, but it does definitely looks a bit strange. The main part of the window, there's 4 main panels, 4 lancet windows. The first one features David, and it has the insignia of the Royal Artillery. The second panel features Jonathan, who's quite often in memorial windows of various types, whether or not they're war-related or otherwise. You quite often find David and Jonathan who are twinned, and that's because in the Old Testament, both those characters are twinned together, one representing valor and one representing love, and that's quite a common thing you get in a lot of memorial windows. The insignia at that panel, or that lancet window, is the Royal Irish Fusiliers. You then have a figure of St. George. You can just see the dragon in the background here, and his sword. And the insignia for that one is the Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers. And finally, in the last lancet window, you have a representation of a Great War soldier. And the regimental insignia there is the Royal Irish Rifles, which would be the predominant regiment or for County Down. Quite a lot of detail in the one for the First World War soldier. You can see the various bits of kit, the scabbard for his bayonet, but also in the background you can see a plume of cloud or ashes from an explosion, and there's various other bits and pieces. You can see the sandbags and so forth. So a lot of detail has gone into that window. Going to look at the Close brothers. 4 sons of Elizabeth Close, who was a widow from Scarver Street in Banbridge, served in the Great War. Their father, Joseph, had died at Anderson Street in the town in September 1894. And I've put the names against them on the screen here just so you can see who I'm talking about at each stage of this section. William Close was deployed to France with 1st Battalion Royal Irish Rifles on 8th November 1914, and he was killed in action at Hooge on the 29th of May 1915 at the age of 30. He's commemorated on the Ploeg Street Memorial in Belgium. Next to him we have Hugh Henry Close, and he enlisted with the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers in July 1908, and he was stationed at Aldershot with the 2nd Battalion in 1911. He was in India with the 1st Battalion at the start of the war. He participated in the landings at Y Beach on the Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915 at the very start of the Gallipoli campaign. He was wounded twice in that campaign, being invalided home. When he was fit for duty again in April 1916, he rejoined the 1st Battalion, which by that stage was in France on the Western Front. And later in 1916, he was awarded the Military Medal. Unfortunately, with military medal awards, you can never really tie it down to a specific incident because there's no citations. But based on the time lapse, him getting the Military Medal Award in the tail end of 1916 would indicate that it was probably awarded for his actions during the 1916 battles of the Somme. But it's just an indication. He was a sergeant when he was discharged as being no longer physically fit for war service. Due to sickness in March 1919, he received a 10% disablement pension for appendicitis and the effects of gassing. Moving down to the bottom corner, we have George Joseph Close, and he served in the Boer War with the Imperial Yeomanry, and he married Mary Ann Jennings on 29th August 1902 at St. Patrick Parish Church. He was working as an oiler in a spinning mill when he enlisted in the North Irish Horse in September 1914. He was deployed to France on 1st May 1915 and was awarded the Military Medal for the part he played in the fighting during the Advance to Victory offensive in the closing weeks of the war. George Close was transferred to the Class Z Army Reserve on 20th February 1919. Those of you who maybe don't know what the Class Z Army Reserve means, it meant that he would have been in a situation where if war had broken out again, he would have been immediately recalled to the colours and sent to the fighting front. The final brother is Robert, and he was with the 5th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles when he was posted to 2nd Battalion on the Western Front in late December 1914. He was killed in action at Hill 60 on 7th May 1915 at the age of 20, and he's commemorated on the Menengate Memorial in Ypres. So we've got 4 brothers. 2 of them were awarded military medals, 2 of them died, and 2 survived, although whether you can really call anyone that came through that conflict as having survived, because most of them survived with having a certain degree of injury or without having been unscathed. So everyone that came through that war, nobody came through that war unscathed in totality. Moving across into County Armagh, we've got this pair of war memorial windows in Kingsmill Presbyterian Church. Again, one of the things you tend to find is that the memorial windows in Presbyterian churches tend to be a bit more plain in their ornamentation. They were unveiled and dedicated on Sunday the 28th of May 1922 by the Reverend James Meek of Warrenpoint, and he was the senior minister of the congregation at that time. Each window has what appears to be a memorial tablet, but it's been represented in stas. One of the representations records the names of the 6 members of the congregation who died in the Great War. So in this panel here, under fell in action, we've got the names of 6 fatalities. The other window, the other panel, records the names of 27 members of the congregation who served and returned home. Among those that served are 2 ministers and 6 women are named. So you can see the Reverend Hugh Meek, who I'll talk about shortly, but down at the bottom, at the end of the list, we've got females who were served during the war. Unfortunately, their names were not included in the PCI Roll of Honour, which means it's difficult to find out exactly what their element of service was. Some of them could have been serving with the voluntary aid detachments. Some of them could have been serving with the Women's Army Corps or with the Military Nursing Corps, but we don't know without looking at specific church records. And quite often on memorials where women are mentioned, they're mentioned separately at the end rather than being interspersed with the other people that served. I think that's a good thing because it means that you can focus in on the women, you can identify them easier, and you don't often get women being named on memorials. And I think it's fantastic when we see females whose position, whose service is being recognised in that way. So I'm going to look at the Reverend Meek. He was born on 15th February 1872 at Mullaglass near Newry. So the Reverend James Meek, the man who unveiled the memorials, and Margaret Craig. The Reverend Meek was minister at Ballylinny Presbyterian Church near Ballyclare between 1899 and 1904. And then he applied and was accepted as a chaplain to the forces in January 1905. He married Nora Coffey, who was also the daughter of a clergyman, on 28th March 1906 in Dublin. Hugh Craig Meek was minister of St Andrew's Garrison Church in Aldershot in England at the outbreak of the war. He was deployed to France on the 21st of August 1914 as a chaplain to the 8th Field Ambulance, which was part of the 3rd Division. So it would have been part of a regular battalion or division of men. During the war, he saw active service in France, East Africa, and Palestine. And he was mentioned in dispatches on 4 occasions: in October 1914, June 1915, February 1917, and June 1918. In addition, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order in the 1918 King's Birthday Honours List. Now, the Distinguished Service Order is one step down from a Victoria Cross. So we don't know exactly what he had done to be awarded that, but because he was awarded it in the Honours List, it would indicate that it was for a series of acts of gallantry, each one of which on its own did not warrant an award, but when observed together, they were of such magnitude that they felt that a Distinguished Service Order was merited. And this is for a man who would have been at various fronts, at various engagements, unarmed. He retired from the army in 1926 and moved to England, living at Farnborough, where he worked quite a lot with local blind people. On the night of Friday, the 9th of February 1934, his body was discovered on Farnborough Golf Course by 2 army officers. His estate was valued at £3,998 and 19 shillings and twopence. And in modern terms, that would equate to £239,138. His wife, Nora, is one of the 6 women who are named on the memorial window. But as I said, I haven't been able to determine what the nature of her service was. Certainly, she's not included in the VAD cards, which are currently available, although that is an ongoing process. Moving south from County Armagh into County Monaghan. This is the window at St Andrew's Church of Ireland, which is near Clones in County Monaghan. It's also known as Scots House Church of Ireland. The window was designed by Percy Bacon of London and was dedicated on Sunday the 27th of April 1924 by the Reverend James McManaway, who was the Bishop of Clocker. Again, I'm going to break it down and look at different portions. The top portion, we have the Dove of Peace right at the very pinnacle, the IHS emblem, the abbreviation meaning Jesu Hominum Salvator, or Jesu, Saviour of Mankind. And then we have the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end symbol on the other side. On one side is a laurel wreath with the year 1914. On the other side is 1918. And the inscription in the middle says, "Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I will give thee rest." Moving down into the main portion, we've got three figures. Going to start and just work across them. The first figure is St. Patrick, and above his head are the words, "Depart from evil and do good." The central panel features Jesus, and the words, "Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." At the base of the panel are the words, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, thy victory." The third panel features St. George, and he's under the words, "I have fought the good fight." There are two scrolls here and here, which when read in totality read, "Their name liveth forevermore." And you can, when you look at that portion of the window, St. George is relatively plain apart from his flaming sword. The Jesus figure, you've got a blast of the red color, and then you've got a wee bit of purple showing in the vestments of St. Patrick. But it's a beautiful window. A panel has been installed in the front of it, which to my mind cuts off a wee bit of the bottom of the window, and it just spoils it to a certain degree, but not enough, because you can see that you can't actually read the name St. Patrick or St. Michael. Gerald Hugh Charles Madden was born on 26th July 1872 at Hilton Park near Clones to John Madden and Caroline Clements. Gerald Madden received a commission as a second lieutenant with the 5th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers in January 1891. He was transferred to the 3rd Hussars in December 1894, and he was posted to India with the Hussars. But then he was transferred to the Irish Guards as a captain in 1901. The Irish Guards was only formed in 1901, so he was one of the very first officers in that regiment. During the Second Boer War, he was attached to the 16th Lancers and took part in the relief of Kimberley and various other operations in the Orange Free State. On 6th June 1901, he married Mabel Lucy Macpherson Grant of Ballindallack Castle in Banffshire in Scotland, and that wedding took place at St. Peter's Church in Eaton Square, London. In 1909, he was made a Knight of the Royal Order of the Sword by the King of Sweden. What for, I do not know. He resigned his commission in 1912, but was recalled to active service at the outbreak of the war. He held the rank of Major when he was posted to the 1st Battalion Irish Guards in France in September 1914, and he was gazetted to acting Lieutenant Colonel in September 1915. On 11th October 1915, a few days after the end of the Battle of Loos, a shell landed in the doorway of Madden's headquarters dugout at Vermel in both of Madden's legs. He was evacuated to hospital in London, where he died of his wounds on 12th November 1915 at the Princess Henry of Battenberg's Hospital. He was 43 years old, and his body was returned to Ireland and buried in the graveyard at Scots House Church. He was mentioned in Field Marshal Sir John French's dispatch published in January 1916, and is also commemorated on a family memorial in the Macpherson Grant family at Inch Church in Kincraig. And these are the two headstones that I was referring to, and in between is the insignia of the award that he received from the King of Sweden. You can see that on the headstone, which is in the churchyard in Clones, in the centre of it, you've got the insignia of the Irish Guards. There's quite a lot of details in there, because it says, died in London, 12th November 1915, of wounds received in action at Vermel. It also gives his date of birth and his widow's name. Obviously, this is the headstone at the family of his widow, and you see Mabel Madden died in 1951, and it refers to her as the devoted wife of Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Madden. So there we've got a man from County Monaghan, had some sort of connection with the Swedish government. Possibly he was stationed there as a military attaché or something like that, but unfortunately there's no information as to what specifically that award was made for. Moving north again into County Fermanagh, and this is the memorial window in Enniskillen Presbyterian Church. And I must admit, it's one of my favourites that I've seen so far, because there is quite a lot of detail in it. The window was designed by William Morrison Company of Westminster, and it was installed by Thomas James Harvey of Enniskillen. The window was unveiled on Sunday the 10th of April 1921 by Sir James Craig, who was later to be the first Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, and it was dedicated by the Very Reverend Major General John Morrow Sims. He had been a chaplain throughout the First World War. The upper portion of the window features the crown of life, and the words love, obedience, faith, honour, valour and fortitude are in the surroundings of that. You've also got the insignia of the two Enniskillen Regiment, the Enniskillen Dragoons and the Enniskillen Fusiliers. The central portion is dominated by a representation of a painting called The White Comrade. This was painted in 1915 by George Hilliard Swinstead. The artist used two soldiers, injured soldiers, who were at Maudsley Hospital as his models for his painting. And it features a medic, a stretcher bearer, giving water to a wounded man as he carries him or leads him off the field of battle. The painting was reproduced in the Illustrated London News shortly after the Battle of Lewes, and it has been replicated in various forms ever since, and with various representations and slight deviations in what is being shown. Again, in the background in these clouds, you can just see the burst of a shell, and down here you can see parts of the trench. So again, there's quite a lot of detail in that specific, and right the way down in the corner here, there are some flowers that have been laid, almost as if they were being laid at a grave. On either side of the main portion of the window, there are panels which list the 9 fatalities from the congregation on this side. There's 2 here which list the died, 5 on this side and 4 on this side. And then further down, you have 2 panels which list the wounded from the congregation. And this is unusual because it's very unusual to see men who were wounded being listed separately from those who served and were not formally wounded. At the base of the window, there are 5 panels which record the name of 34 men and 4 women who served but were not classified as having been wounded. There are 63 names on the window in total, one of which has been added later. If you look, you probably can't see it on your screens, but right at the bottom here in the central panel, you've got T. Maxwell, and the lettering is larger than all the other lettering. So it's obvious it's been added later, and to my mind, it's been added by somebody who didn't have the same level of skill as the original glaziers and engravers. 6 families represented in this window had 2 members who served. 6 families had 3 members who served. 4 members of the Shaw family of Belmore Street served. 6 men from the Caldwell family from Henry Street served, 3 being wounded and 2 dying. So of 6 sons from the Caldwell family, 2 died, 3 were wounded, and only 1 came back, quotes, unscathed. I'm going to look at the Trimble brothers from Enniskillen. 3 sons of William Copeland Trimble held commissions with the Irish regiments in the Great War. William Trimble was a justice of the peace, and he was the owner of the Impartial Reporter newspaper. During the Ulster Covenant Trail in 1912, William Trimble had made the arrangements for Sir Edward Carson's visit to Enniskillen. So he's a senior or a prominent member of the Unionist community, a prominent leader of the Home Rule faction within Ireland. He married Letitia Jane Weir in October 1881, but she had died in January 1892. He then married Lily Duncan Riley in May 1893 at Lisbon Presbyterian Church. The reason why I pointed out quite specifically William Trimble's close associations with the anti-Home Rule movement is because of the nature of the service of his three sons, all of whom would also have been from the Unionist community, obviously. So I'm going to run through them individually. First of all, we've got Reginald Stuart Trimble, who was born on 13th July 1885, and he received the commission via the Inns of Court Officers Training Corps on 30th September 1914. He was posted to the 6th Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers in the 10th Irish Division. He participated in the landings at Suvla Bay in August 1915 and was wounded during the Gallipoli campaign. He later served with the Royal Engineers and he survived the war. Elwyn Egerton Copeland Trimble was born on 10th February 1894, and he was a divinity student at Trinity College when the war started. He received a commission with the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and he joined the 7th Battalion, part of the 16th Irish Division in France in February 1916. He was commended for bravery during 2 engagements in May 1916 and was wounded on 21st June. He held the rank of captain when he was discharged with Silver War Badge in May 1919. And finally, Noel Desmond Trimble was born on 20th December 1895, and he received his commission with the 12th Battalion of the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers in June 1915. Although this was a reserve battalion of the Ulster Division, he was subsequently posted to the 8th Battalion, which was part of the 16th Irish Division in France in March 1916. He was killed in action at the age of 20 during the Battle of Hewlett on 29th April 1916, and he's buried in the Philosophe British Cemetery at Mazingarbe in France. That was the famous attack when the Germans used poison gas on the 16th Irish Division. But we've got 3 sons of a prominent unionist, a prominent anti-Home Ruler, and none of them served in a situation with the Ulster Division. 2 served with the 16th Irish Division, which was generally regarded as being predominantly nationalist, and 1 served with the 10th Irish Division, which was regarded as being a more equal allocation of nationalists and unionists. It wasn't formed from either of the volunteer movements that were present in Ireland just before the war. And quite often, certainly in Northern Ireland, there's the conception that if you were a unionist and you served in the war, you served in the Ulster Division. But the biographies of these 3 men show that that was just not true. Moving up into County Tyrone, Derry Lauren Church of Ireland in Cookstown, also called St. Lauren's Church of Ireland. This window was designed by Ward and Partners of Belfast, and the tracery window includes the Crown of Life. The main window in 2 panels, 2 lancet panels, depicts King David and his, quote, mighty men who fetched water at great personal risk. The inscription reads, "Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives?" And the window is dedicated to our glorious dead, Great War 1914-1918. The details of when the memorial was dedicated and who performed the dedication are not known. A memorial tablet in the church records the name of 35 men from the congregation who died and 118 men who served. 7 of the fatalities listed on the church memorial are also listed on this memorial for the gunning power loom weaving factory at Milburn in Cookstown. Whenever that factory was knocked down, there's now a Tesco's on the site. The memorial was relocated to Cookstown Royal British Legion Hall, and until a few days ago I did not know about it, so it's another one that's on my to-do list to visit and photograph. I lifted this off the Cookstown War Dead website, and thank you very much to the guys that are behind that for putting it on their website for me to steal. I'm going to look at 1 man, 2 men actually. One's on the memorial and 1 isn't, although they were brothers. William Nathaniel Tom was born on 24th September 1887 at Turmockshane near Orator, to William Tom and Margaret Morrow. His father was a farmer and his mother was a national school teacher. He was known as Nathaniel or Nat, and he was a linen factory manager in 1911. And at that stage, he was lodging with Charles Mills, who was a master painter, and they lived at Old Town Street in Cookstown. His father died at the Poplars in Cookstown, and his mother later moved to Dublin. Nathaniel Thom enlisted with the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers and held the rank of Lance Corporal when he was deployed to France with 9th Battalion in October 1915. Private Thomas Taylor, who is commemorated as a survivor on the memorial tablet, reported that he was with Nat Thom as they approached the enemy lines on 1st July 1916, and that he saw Corporal Thom being struck in the head by a bullet. Corporal William Nathaniel Thom was 28 years old when he died, and he's commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial in France. His elder brother John was minister at St. Catherine's Church of Ireland in Dublin when he was appointed as a chaplain on the 1st of December 1915 and deployed to France in March 1916. He was awarded the Military Cross on 3 occasions, also awarded the Croix de Guerre by the King of the Belgians. The first Military Cross was awarded in 1916 for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty and action. During an attack, he worked continuously under heavy fire attending the wounded. Though ill and exhausted, he spent the night after an attack in no man's land and at the dressing station, tending the wounded and visiting the dying. The first bar to the Military Cross was awarded for his actions during the opening days of the Third Battle of Ypres in 1917. For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, during the attack he went forward and assisted in establishing an aid post in the captured area, and then went forward and guided stretcher bearers back to the aid post. He constantly went out to comfort the wounded that were waiting to be brought in. During the whole period the battalion was in the line, he worked night and day consoling the wounded and helping to dress them, and when stretcher bearers were not available, he carried in the wounded himself. The second bar to the Military Cross was awarded for his actions in late 1917, quite possibly in the Cambrai operations. For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty in remaining throughout an attack at an advanced aid post. He also went up to the front line in daylight in full view of enemy machine guns and snipers, visiting the wounded and comforting the dying, and superintending the burial of the dead under heavy shell fire. And again, it's worth pointing out, chaplains did not bear arms. They did not have even handguns. And yet here's a man who was persistently putting himself in danger to aid other people, to aid people who were wounding or dying, and to give them succor. And to me, that requires a phenomenal amount of gallantry and bravery. And yet, he was not a combatant. I have nothing but respect for chaplains, irrespective of their denomination, who served in frontline positions, because they worked as stretcher bearers. They worked as going out unarmed, as I said before, into the battlefields to help to bring in the wounded, and in some cases to bring in the dead, so that their bodies would not be lost. I'm speechless as to their bravery, and it's an area that has not really been covered in terms of documentation and books. There's not that many books that have been written about the chaplains who served, although I do believe there is a researcher in Northern Ireland who's working with a researcher from Dublin on this very topic, but I won't give the game away. Moving west into County Donegal. My apologies for this photograph being heavily watermarked. I've not yet had the opportunity to visit this church to photograph the memorial, and so this has been lifted from the glowin.ie website, which is a Church of Ireland website which documents stained glass windows of all descriptions in Church of Ireland buildings within the island of Ireland. So basically it covers all the counties, and it's accessible. You can look either by church location or by the building or by the type of memorial. You can even search for, if you wanted to identify memorials that were designed and created by specific companies like Cloghey of Belfast or Warden Partners or the Anglo Tour in Dublin. then you can do that. And it's a fantastic repository of information, but they do heavily watermark their images, and quite rightly so, because I will be visiting this church in due course. This window was designed by Percy Bacon of London and was unveiled by Brigadier General Ambrose Ricardo, DSO, and dedicated by the Reverend Joseph Peacock, Bishop of Derry and Raphoe. And that took place on Sunday, the 10th of April, 1921. Quite a lot of detail in this window, so I'm going to look at it in 4 sections. First of all, the section at the top, you can see that hanging down in front of it is a light fitting which detracts somewhat from the beauty. Tracery window features the Archangel St. Michael holding a laurel in his right hand, inverted sword in his left hand. It represents victory, the victory won through the war. The first lancet window features David, and it's designated as representing valor. And in this example, David, it's not David as a king, it's David as the slayer of Goliath. You can see his pouch of pebbles and his sling. Below the words, at the bottom of the panel is a scroll, representation of a scroll, on which the names of 10 of the fatalities from the congregation are listed. The central panel is about sacrifice, and the imagery is Abraham willingly preparing to sacrifice his son Isaac. And again, the corollary is that the men who went off to war willingly gave their lives for the betterment of society, for the better good of their country. The third window features Jonathan, and again, as I said earlier, he is generally representing the concept of love. And in the overall context of the window, you need to have love and give sacrifice to perform acts of valor. That's what the window is saying, that sacrifice, valor, and love are intertwined in terms of people's willingness to put themselves in danger and to fight for what they consider to be the betterment of their society. The panel at the bottom lists a further 9 fatalities from the congregation. There's a separate tablet which lists the names of 54 men from the congregation who served and returned home. Look at just one of the fatalities that are listed on the memorial window, and that's Morgan Edward Gellett Moore, who was born on 22nd February 1894 at the asylum in Letterkenny to Edward Erskine Moore and Nina Margaret Jane Gellett. Now, before you think that his mother must have been a lunatic if he was born in the asylum, that's not the case. His father was the resident medical superintendent of the asylum, and the family lived on the premises. Morgan Moore was educated at Arravon School in Barray in County Wicklow, and he was a student at King's College in Cambridge when he obtained a commission with the 13th Battalion Royal Rifles in the autumn of 1914. He was promoted to lieutenant in February 1916 and posted to France. In June 1916, he received a commission in the regular army. So the 13th Battalion was a service battalion. It was a battalion raised as part of Kitchener's new army, but it was a service that was only to last for the duration of the war, whereas the commission he received with the regulars would have continued beyond the war if that had been the case. He was posted to the 2nd Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. He was wounded twice during the fighting in July 1916 and was awarded the Military Cross in the New Year's Honours List of January 1917. He participated in the fighting during the Third Battle of Ypres and the Cambrai operations in 1917 and was reported missing on the 24th of March 1918 during the German Spring Offensive. He was later confirmed as having died of his wounds in a German field hospital at Blaye-le-Martel on 27th March 1918. The Commonwealth War Graves database records his date of death as the 24th of March 1918. He was 24 years old and is buried in the Grand Serrecourt British Cemetery in France. At that stage, his parents were living at the Haven in Teignmouth in Devon in England. For the German Spring Offensive, the Battle of St. Quentin, there's a lot of discrepancies between different sources regarding the date of death. Quite often you'll see in Commonwealth war graves, if you look at the underlying data, it'll quite often say 21st March to 29th March, because that was the period of the battle, and they don't know exactly when people died. Some of the other sources are more specific, but again, some of them always take the end of the battle as the date. Commonwealth war graves tends to take the earlier part of the battle, or the date on which a man was reported missing. But as several of the sources record his date of death as 27th, and also an obituary that was in the British Medical Journal records 27th, there is scope for having Commonwealth war graves to reclassify his date of death as 27th of March 1918 rather than 24th, and documentation has been sent to the Commonwealth war graves asking them to reconsider. So moving east again into County Londonderry and Magherafelt, First Presbyterian Church. Again, as you can see, it's a relatively plain memorial. This window was unveiled on Sunday the 10th of November 1935 by Mr. Henry Pringle Malcolmson Wilson, who was manager of the Northern Bank in Magherafelt and a member of the local branch of the British Legion. The service was conducted by the Reverend W.F. Marshall from Castle Rock, but the designer of the window is not known. There's nothing on the window to indicate who designed the window, and the newspaper reports about its unveiling do not go into specifics. There's no memorial tablet in the church naming fatalities or those who served. The Roll of Honour book was produced after the Second World War. For the Great War, 10 names are recorded as fatalities and 46 people are named as serving. For the Second World War, 2 names are recorded as fatalities and 22 people are recorded as serving. The book also includes the names of 2 men who were killed while serving with the Ulster Defence Regiment during what was termed the Troubles. Book was the work of W&G Baird of Belfast. So we're going to look at each of the panels. The first panel features at the top a red dragon with the year 1914 underneath it. Below that is an unidentified insignia. So far I haven't been able to determine whether it's a reference to a regiment or whether it's a coat of arms of a family. The 102 would lead one to maybe presume that it was for the 102nd Regiment of Foot, which later became the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, but there's no castle or ramparts on the insignia for the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. It's also not the insignia for the Inniskilling Dragoons, because their insignia features a castle with a flag flying from it. So we've got some ambiguity as to exactly what that insignia represents. And again, because there's no documentation, there's no information from that end of things either. Down at the bottom of this window, there's a small panel which records that this part of the overall window was erected by Samuel Love of Dunamony. There are 3 men called Love from Dunamony in the Roll of Honour book. They're not the sons of Samuel Love, but might have been nephews. Lance Corporal Daniel Love was killed in action on 1st July 1916, aged 21, while serving with the 9th Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers. Now, as he had died with the Inniskilling Fusiliers, I would have expected to have seen the insignia of that regiment being portrayed in the window that his family had paid to be installed. The central window is probably the most complex of the 3. It features at the top the Royal Coat of Arms of the United Kingdom and depicts the putting on of the armour of God. Down at his right foot you can see the gauntlets. He's strapping on the shield of faith, and he's been handed the sword of the Spirit. And this is recorded as having been erected by the members of the congregation. So they paid for this particular part of the overall window. On the final panel, it features the Dove of Peace at the top and the year 1918. The insignia is that of the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and the inscription panel at the base records that it was erected by the Ritchie family. It doesn't give details of where the Ritchie family were from. In the Roll of Honour book, there are 3 sons of Samuel Ritchie of Ballymogan who served with the American Expeditionary Force. Private Henry Hanna Ritchie was in training with an engineers unit of the American Army when he died on 1st November 1917, aged 19, at Spartanburg in South Carolina. Now, we've got a window for a man from the family of a man who died with the Enniskillen Fusiliers, but not the Enniskillen Fusiliers insignia. We've got a window from a family whose son died with an American unit, but there is the Enniskillen Fusiliers. Now, the cynical part of me says that maybe they got the windows put in the wrong place, or put the dedicatory panel on the wrong windows, because that's the only explanation I can come up with. It would be more sensible for this window with the insignia of the Enniskillen Fusiliers to be associated with the Love family rather than the Ritchie family. But it's probably one of those things where it's lost in the mists of time. 2 sons of James Hammond and Martha Armstrong of Grange near Desert Martin were killed in action on 1st July 1916 while serving with the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. Both are commemorated on the memorial tablet in Curran Presbyterian Church in Desert Martin, as well as being commemorated in the Roll of Honour book for 1st Magherafelt. James Joseph Hammond was born on 26 June 1892 at Desert Martin and enlisted at Omagh in November 1915. He was serving with the 9th Battalion of the Enniskillen Fusiliers when he was killed in action at the age of 24, and he's buried in the Connaught Cemetery in Thiepval. John Hammond was born on 27th August 1894 in Desert Martin and enlisted at Enniskillen in August 1915. He was serving with the 10th Battalion when he was killed in action at the age of 21. He has no known grave and is commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial in France. In the graveyard at Curran Presbyterian Church, there are 2 family memorials that refer to the 2 fatalities. Joseph and John are both commemorated on this memorial tablet, which is the headstone which is at their parents' grave. The other gravestone is at their paternal grandparents' grave, but only John is commemorated. Down here you can just see their grandson John Hammond killed in action in France 1st July 1916, but it doesn't mention James Joseph. Why? Don't know. But it just seems unusual that on the grandparents' headstone only one of the 2 men would be commemorated, especially as they both died on the same day. Maybe John was the favourite grandson. Moving east again into County Antrim, and this is the memorial window at First Presbyterian Church, and it's probably the most ornate memorial window that I've come across for the First World War in a Presbyterian church, and it is very heavily military oriented. The window was unveiled on Tuesday the 1st of February 1921 by Colonel Thomas Sinclair, who had served with the Royal Army Medical Corps, and it was dedicated by the Reverend Major General John Morrow Sims. Members of the congregation had raised £539 and 2 shillings towards the cost of the memorial window. In current terms, that would equate to approximately £26,470. The window features predominantly in the centre. You've got the burning bush symbol of the Presbyterian Church, but it also includes the insignia of 15 regiments and the Royal Navy. I'm going to go through these one at a time, just in sections. So at the very top of the window, you have the Irish Guards, the King's Own Scottish Borderers, and the Army Service Corps. Next, you have the Highland Light Infantry and the Royal Scots. Next, you have the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, although the direction of flight of the flag at the top of the castle is incorrect for the First World War. And you have the Machine Gun Corps. In the next set of panels, you have the Royal Irish Rifles, Royal Irish Fusiliers, North Irish Horse, and the Royal Engineers. And then down at the base, you have artillery, which would cover both field artillery, horse artillery, and garrison artillery, the Royal Army Medical Corps, the Royal Flying Corps, which would also encompass the Royal Air Force, the St. John of Jerusalem Ambulance Brigade, which would be to represent nurses who had served with that voluntary group, and then the crowned anchor, which represents the Royal Navy. With a few exceptions, the insignia depicted matches up with the regiments with which the members of the congregation served. Insignia are missing for the Seaforth Highlanders, the 3rd Dragoon Guards, and the Canadians, New Zealanders, Australians, and the United States Army. It's quite possible that they just basically ran out of room, and they picked the insignia for the regiments with which most men or more men had served during the war. The detail in it, again, is phenomenal, and it's so complicated. There's so much going on in it in terms of the insignia. Very difficult to photograph clearly its position and the lighting. I'm going to pick up on one man from this congregation, and that's Robert Sinclair Knox, who was born on 2nd March 1881 at Ballyvershane to William John Knox and Nancy McAfee, who farmed land at Moneygobbin. Robert was recorded as being a clerk in 1901 and as a produce merchant in 1911. He worked for Hugh Thomas Barry, the Irish Unionist MP for North Londonderry, from 1906 to 1918, and then the Ulster Unionist MP from 1919 until his death in 1922. After the war, Robert Sinclair Knox became a director of the firm for whom he had worked before the war. Before the war, he was the commander of the Coleraine Company of the North Down Regiment UVF, and he received a commission with the 10th Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers. He held the rank of captain when he was deployed to France in October 1915 and was promoted to major in June 1916. Robert Knox was one of only 7 officers to be awarded the Distinguished Service Order 4 times during the Great War. He was also mentioned in dispatches and awarded the French Croix de Guerre in June 1919. The first DSO award was reported in the London Gazette in December 1916, and there was no citation because it was part of the New Year's Honours List. The first barge of the DSO was reported in February 1918, and the citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, previous hostile attacks, the position of the line his battalion took over was very uncertain. By a personal night reconnaissance, he was able to adjust the line, and later, when the enemy commenced a bombing attack, he again went forward to reconnoitre the position, which was very critical, and then organised a successful attack, driving back the enemy and taking prisoners. His courage throughout was magnificent." The second barge of the DSO was reported in September 1918, and the citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, he held a position against superior enemy forces until relieved, and made dispositions which held up the enemy for a considerable time. He handled his men under heavy machine gun fire with coolness and skill, setting a fine example to all under him and inspiring them with confidence." Robert Knox was the commanding officer of 9th Battalion when the third barge of the DSO was reported in March 1919. Again, there's no citation for that award. Robert Knox held the rank of Lieutenant Colonel when he relinquished his commission in February 1919. Robert Sinclair, who had married Ivy Lynch in May 1917 in London, unveiled the Akadui War Memorial in November 1921. He was made a Deputy Lieutenant for County Londonderry in August 1938 and returned to Army service with the Royal Engineers in the Second World War as a Lieutenant Colonel. He retired in 1949 and died on 25th January 1963. Moving into Greater Belfast, the memorial window at St Thomas Church of Ireland on Eglantine Avenue, just off the Lisburn Road. The entire baptistry of this church was consecrated as a war memorial, and in addition to the window, it includes a memorial tablet recording the names of 32 fatalities and a series of small plaques commemorating individuals. One of these plaques is for the fatality that I will talk about in a few minutes. The memorial window was designed by Heaton, Butler and Bain of London, and was dedicated on Sunday the 24th of April 1921 by the Reverend Charles Staunton Primrose Grierson, Bishop of Down, Connor and Dromore. The imagery of the window refers to reward, sacrifice and victory. The first panel features a heavenly being wearing the crown of life and is captioned "Reward." The central panel features the crucified Christ and a fallen soldier, with a scene of destroyed buildings in the background. The inscription is, "Greater love hath no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends." So again, sacrifice. The third panel features a heavenly being bearing a palm branch and is captioned "Victory." Could also be used to represent peace. One from this congregation, and down at the bottom of the screen here is the type of small memorial plaque that is in the baptistry. Adam Cyril Darley Hill was born on 7th December 1890 at the Northern Bank on Grafton Street in Dublin to Edwin Darley Hill and Deborah Overend. His father was the branch manager at the bank, and the family lived at Palmerston Road in Dublin. His brother and two sisters also had Darley as one of their forenames, so obviously it was a family tradition, a family name that was carried down through the generations. In 1911, the family was living at Griannan on Dermore Drive in Belfast, and Edwin Darley Hill was recorded as being the managing director of the Northern Banking Company. Adam was educated at St. Columba's College in Dublin and joined the staff of the Northern Bank on 11th October 1915, being placed at the Falls Road branch. In December 1915, he enlisted as a private and received training at the Curragh and then at Fermoy with 7th Battalion Officers Training Corps. He received his commission with the 4th Extra Reserve Battalion of the Royal Irish Rifles in September 1916, and was then posted to the 7th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles in France, again part of the 16th Irish Division. Second Lieutenant Adam Cyril Darley Hill was reported missing on 16th August 1917, the first day of the Battle of Langemarck, one of two significant battles in which the Ulster Division and the Irish Division fought side by side, and hopefully that will be the topic for a further talk in August. According to newspaper reports, in December 1917, he was still missing. The family was still asking for information about his whereabouts. Adam Hill was recorded as having died on 16th August 1917 at the age of 19, and the Commonwealth War Graves headstone in Tynecott Cemetery records believed to be buried in the cemetery. So when he died, he was buried, but the exact position of his burial became lost as the ground was fought over. So they know he's buried in that area, in that what is now a cemetery, but they just don't know precisely where. He's also commemorated on the Memorial Roll of Honour for the Northern Bank and on a family memorial in Belfast City Cemetery. This is the one on your left is the memorial in Belfast City Cemetery. As you can see, it's lost the cross, which would have been at the top of the plinth. Edwin and Deborah Hill were living at Green Island when a lectern was dedicated to the memory of Second Lieutenant Adam Hill in St. Nicholas Parish Church in Carrickfergus in September 1927. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings this talk about War Memorial Windows to an end. Thank you very much.